Without any further ado, you can see from the program, also the first slide, that I'm sharing with you some reflections on what I deem to be possible impacts of COVID-19 on urban law development in South Africa in the coming years. And there is an environmental law, strong environmental law dimension to this. I am briefly going to touch on what has been happening internationally in relation to cities responding to COVID. And then I'm bringing it to the South African context, focusing on three possible or three issues which I think have been highlighted by COVID the past couple of months. The three of those issues you see on the screen, I'm going to get back to them also just now, but I'm only going to focus on one in the interest of time. So perhaps just to say that cities have been very much involved in the global response to COVID the past couple of months in the developed and developing world. Cities, of course, have been the epicenters of COVID if one looks at the statistics and the numbers of infections and deaths. But then also cities have been the entry point to reach people and for governments and NGOs and human health organizations engaging in response measures with people and institutions. And then clearly municipalities had no choice but to become the operational partners of national government's response action and the delivery of in the delivery of services, part of the emergency health preparedness in various parts of the world. In relation to the urban response measures, we see that in the collective, things have happened as far as cities are concerned. The World Health Organization has rolled out directions, guidelines, instructions even for cities, big and small, worldwide. The same with UNESCO. The C40 Cities Network also made pledges, similarly engaged with cities to help and support in addressing the impact of COVID, especially in the global north, where we've had the first line of experiences. And then individual city experiments, if one does a bit of research in this area, you see that quite a few cities innovatively responded to COVID the past couple of months. I'm not going to run you through all of the things that have happened globally, but some interesting things emerged in the UK, definitely also in the USA, Spain, and then on our own continent, Kampala has been quite a champion in its initiatives in relation to combating COVID. And then we've also seen, obviously, in South Africa, quite a fair bit of things happening, although the response in South Africa is difficult to trace as far as city initiatives are concerned, and the reason being that it's not very much documented. Municipalities are slow putting up initiatives on their websites, etc. So what I could gather is not necessarily a reflection on what South African municipalities and cities have really done. What I could pick up on is that SALGA, as the representative body of municipalities in the country, have rolled out quite a fair bit of initiatives in relation to donations, awareness raising, and engaging with individual cities in their responses, giving a bit of guidance, especially in the smaller towns, not necessarily our metro areas. Many municipalities have rolled out local disaster management forums and awareness raising projects. City of Cape Town developed quite an interesting dashboard. You can see that on the right side of the screen also. City of Joburg, as expected, rolled out an alternative payment process because of municipal bills and physical payment having been affected by COVID. And then Drakensberg in the Western Cape had very frequent press releases where the mayor engaged with the community, kept them up to date. There was also regular letters available on its website, etc. But all in all, as I've said, it's difficult to give a true picture of how municipalities stepped in to help national government and the Department of Health overall. But stepping back in time, I think all of us present here are aware of the fact that the state of urban governance in South Africa is worrying at many levels. all three types or categories of municipalities, metro, district, and local, are experiencing severe problems in relation to governance, financial management, service delivery, public participation. All of those areas are being, yeah, we worry about it, and it's not a matter of just relying on press. That's what we read in the press, but it's also a matter of the science pointing towards problems. If we look at the cases before the courts, most recently, we've had the Makanda Grahamstown case. Last week, we've had the decision on the Tafelberg case, which is not necessarily reflecting on financial problems, but more problems in relation to equality and municipalities struggling to meet the needs of people, all people, that is. The Auditor General report this year was dooming. It was themed not much to go around, yet not the right hands at the till. And if you read that report, we can see that 20 out of 270 odd municipalities had clean audits this year. Independent research, there's an increased body of independent research being rolled out, of course in anticipation of the local government elections next year, and those are also quite disturbing. I've read the draft State of the Cities report done by the SACN that will be released early next year, and that report is also, for the first time ever, really negative about the state of local governance. And I'm not going to say much about what's in the press. You are bombarded with that anyway in social media and the print press. So for me, COVID-19 continues to expose deep systemic problems and challenges with the urban development and urban governance trajectory in our country. And the three prominent issues jumping out for me and in my scholarly field are the following: the growing informality and inequality in our cities, loss of ethical commitment of city governors, and then the need to de-risk local governance. So I'm going to focus in the remainder of this presentation only on the issue of growing informality and what I think COVID is showing us in terms of addressing informality. So urban informality speaks to the informal economy as well as to informal housing, and it speaks to issues of inequality in relation to space, etc. And I think it's also important perhaps for the audience here to realize that for a long time, I just want to move here. Informality in our country has been associated with illegality, marginalization, but increasingly we realize that informality is with us and it's here to stay, and it's being celebrated in many circles as a representation of the agency, tenacity, creativity, and ingenuity of city dwellers. But we are not yet looking at the phenomenon of informality across specific domains, including the environmental law domain. So a bit on the informal economy, it's also called the shadow economy. We see that informal micro enterprises are firmly established in our townships. We know that, we see that on a daily basis, also in inner city spaces, but then importantly, also in affluent neighborhood backyards. It's also the lady doing fancy nails in a Santon, in Santon, for example, but in her backyard she's not registered, not paying taxes, etc. So the scope and scale of the informal micro enterprises in South Africa are still very much understood, are poorly understood, that is, and it's broader than generally recognized in policy analyses. And we get various types of such enterprises. I list a few there on the screen that you can see, ranging from shebeens, spaza shops, hair salons, provision of accommodation, to car wash facilities. And most recent stats showing that these are the most prominent business types in the informal economy. By 2011 already, we see that 70% of households in townships source their food from informal vendors. And I need to also emphasize that this informalness often is intended in a way to, for example, avoid business registration requirements and tax obligations. But many times, and I think we should try and understand this, it's also unintended that the regulations and provisions to meet by informal enterprises and entrepreneurs in township economies, for example, are simply impossible to comply with because of the nature of the beast, if I can call it that. So COVID-19 really came to demonstrate the precariousness of the informal economy, often thought to be insulated from global volatilities. This global pandemic certainly also reached the informal economy. The informal economy in our country continues to grow relative to unemployment, and I think we all can understand what that means moving forward, COVID and beyond. We are going to see more and more people, and we, in my own micro environment, I already see this happening. More and more people turning to the informal economy to just make a living. By 2019, 5 million people in South Africa already worked in the informal economy. And then COVID became the employment shock absorber, so we will see that number rising. And the Premier of Gauteng already indicated that Gauteng, which is our most urban province in the country, lost approximately 900,000 jobs, with an estimated total of 2 million to be lost due to the implications of lockdown, etc. So it's easy to enter the informal economy, and it's also easy to exit, I should add. But because of COVID, the expectation is that not many people will exit it soon. And interestingly, a 2014 study, I mean, it's 6 years ago already, indicated that some people working in the informal waste picking sector have been in that sector for 37 years. So many people get stuck there. Studies in Mexico and specifically in relation to Mexican cities have shown, and this is where my presentation transitioned, that the informal economy has significant environmental impact. It's got other impacts as well, but there's a prominent environmental impact. And as the informal economy grows, we can also expect that impact to grow. Similar studies have not yet been done in South Africa, at least not what I could find. Usually what South African researchers look at is the impact of the informal economy on the entire economic sector, and rarely are questions asked about the impact on environmental health of the workers in the informal economy, but also the environmental impact or environmental health risks for the consumers. So the informal economy comes with environmental health risks in South Africa and also in other countries where there's a prominent informal economy sector. Some of the risks I highlight here on the screen, and Melanie and others in their presentations the past couple of days also alluded to the dangers of enterprises selling live animals, posing danger to public health risk, and the danger is in zoonotic disease spread. Poor regulations in relation to hygiene and regulatory standards, for example, trading wild animals at informal markets is known to be a risk for disease spread. The same issue arises with the close mixing of species. Risky food consumption comes with the informal economy. There's a huge exposure and risk in the waste picking sector, which by the way, in South Africa is one of the largest contributors to the informal economy, is the waste picking sector. Informal cosmetic, body piercing, and other such facilities is known to contaminate water with chemicals and substances, microbeads, and there's also the generation of plastic and other wastes. And then uncontrolled and often illegal water use, for example, by informal car wash facilities in townships. But there's also other risks. I'm not going to elaborate on them now. So my question then is, does South African urban and environmental law offer some protection? And there is a yes and a no to this. In relation to the yes, we've got Section 24 of the Constitution mentioning explicitly human health and well-being and the measures to be taken by government and even the private sector. The Constitution allocates municipal health services to municipalities. So there's an acknowledgement that it's a functional area belonging with a sphere of government. And I will just now give you the definition of municipal health services. All municipalities are required to have municipal health officers. And the National Health Act provides that every district and local municipality should provide appropriate municipal health services to be effective and equitable. And then in NEMA, perhaps the principle speaking most prominently to issues of environmental health is the principle saying, or the cradle to grave principle, the responsibility for environmental health and safety consequences of a policy, program, etc., exists throughout its life cycle. So there we see the legislative or the legal definition of municipal health services in South Africa as in terms of the National Health Act. And you will see food control, water quality monitoring, vector control, environmental pollution control, disposal of the dead, chemical safety, etc. So these are things belonging within the purview of the function of municipalities. But there's a no to my question. The Constitution and national legislation, the environmental law, body of environmental law, local government, and health law have all been designed from the perspective of eradicating urban informality over time. This country envisaged cities where there wouldn't be informal housing and where there wouldn't be an informal economy. A 2019-2020 study that we've done at the chair in collaboration with the Gauteng provincial government and the SA Cities Network showed that in Gauteng there's, for example, not a single municipality, with the exception of one, Heidelberg, who's got bylaws or local policies suitable for the control of informal economic activity in combination with sustainable urban development. Bylaws and local policies address environmental health strictly through the lens of formal economic activity. For example, you can only trace, and there's only a focus on those who are registered in monitoring and compliance checking. And environmental health risk is framed in law for the formal sector, depending on local permit and license requirements, business registration, etc. So something that I'm not elaborating on this morning is this whole issue of de-risking local governance in general, but it also speaks to environmental health. Risk mirrors vulnerability and exposure at many levels. Risk is also not unknown in the existing urban law framework. But my issue is that existing risk-related functions such as security risk management and health and safety must align with compulsory municipal risk management plans, and it's happening at the moment. We see that at the moment it's the Municipal Finance Management Act that requires of municipalities to have risk management systems. So it's been designed from an economic and financial angle. The Minister of Finance is the one who must prescribe uniform norms and standards for risk management, for example. And further, when you look at what municipalities have done already in relation to risk, they do incorporate the Bartopele principles in their risk management plans, King 3 and King 4 as well. But the focus is very much on financial and asset-related dimensions of risk. There's no real engagement with environmental or environmental health risk. So the environmental health risks, such as those presented by the informal economy and its enterprises, are not deemed to be a matter of environmental law at the moment, or environmental law principles, but rather it's a matter of financial and voluntary governance standards. So perhaps then to conclude the presentation this morning, I think that COVID came to reinforce pre-existing threats and challenges in local government. And we sit with a local government system that's already on its knees. For me, there are two issues standing out that environmental lawyers should engage with. It's growing informality, and it's going to continue to grow. And then this overall need to de-risk local governance in ways that's not only voluntary and focused on financial risk. And my question, and perhaps we can get back to this in question time, is urban law and environmental law reform necessary to direct the road to risk-ready and sustainable recovery in our cities? In my view, the law needs to cater for as an environment in the environment, of which protection has to look different from conventional sensitive environments. We need to acknowledge informality as a permanent feature of the built environment in our country. We will definitely, and I can elaborate on this later, have to consider instruments other than command and control instruments for regulation of informal enterprises. A bylaw and the request to register your business means nothing for the entrepreneur in a township who's desperate to have food on his table tonight. And then lastly, we have to identify and explicitly start addressing environmental health risks. I think this is a sector that for too long has not deserved the attention that it's required, that is required in environmental law. Thank you very much, Chair.